The house had always been too big for just me. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, the rooms felt hollow, every footstep echoing against the old wooden floors like a memory refusing to fade. I filled the emptiness with routines: gardening in the mornings, knitting in the afternoons, long slow walks in the evenings where the sunset bled across the horizon like a painted prayer. It wasn't the life I had envisioned at 60, but it was a life. Quiet one. Manageable. Then the phone call came. It was one of those calls that split your life into two parts. Before and after. My daughter, my only child, my sunshine, gone. Her husband too. A highway, a rainstorm, a truck that veered into the wrong lane. They said it was quick. That neither of them had suffered. Only their son survived. My grandson, my sweet Thomas. For a moment, standing there in the sterile white of the hospital room, I hardly recognized him. His face was pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, and his body was swathed in bandages and wires like a broken doll someone was still trying to fix. 18 years old, yet somehow so small in that bed. A boy thrust into a cruel new world. I pressed my hand against the glass of the observation window, the coolness biting into my palm. I remembered the day he was born, how my daughter had cried with joy, how I had cradled his tiny frame against my chest, making promises I thought I would never be called upon to keep. And now here he was, mine to protect. It took a week for the doctors to release him. His injuries, they said, were minor compared to what could have been. A fractured wrist, a concussion, a few deep bruises. Miracles, they called it. I didn't know if I believed in miracles anymore. I brought him home that same day. The drive from the hospital was a strange kind of silence. He stared out the window, his expression blank, the landscape rolling by unnoticed. I kept sneaking glances at him, wanting to say something, anything, but the words crumbled before they reached my mouth. What could I possibly say to stitch together a soul so thoroughly torn apart? When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed how he hesitated before getting out of the car. His fingers tightening around the handle, like he was bracing himself to step into a new life he never asked for. The house looked different through his eyes, I realized. Not the cozy sanctuary it had been for me, but a cavernous reminder of all he had lost. Inside, I had done my best to prepare for him. I had moved my sewing things out of the guest room, dusted off the old wooden bed frame, laid fresh linens. I even bought him a new desk lamp, though I doubted he would have the heart to sit and study right now. He said very little that first night. I made dinner, chicken and rice, something easy, familiar, and he picked at it, forcing a few bites before pushing the plate away. His appetite had fled alongside his parents'. When I tried to coax him into conversation, he responded in nods or monosyllables. Eventually he muttered something about being tired and retreated upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen long after he was gone, the soft tick of the clock sounding louder than it should. I rinsed the dishes, wiped the counters, turned off the light, and stood there in the darkness, listening to the creak of the old house around me. That first week was the hardest. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't come all at once, like a thunderclap. It seeps in slowly, like mist through the cracks, touching everything you thought was solid and making it uncertain. Thomas spent most of his time in his room. Sometimes I would hear the muffled sounds of music playing, soft, sad songs, or catch a glimpse of him sitting at the window, staring out at the garden that I had so lovingly tended all these years. I tried not to hover. I knew he needed space. But every fiber of my being ached to reach out, to gather him into my arms and rock him the way I had when he was a toddler afraid of thunderstorms. One afternoon, about a week after he came home, I found him in the backyard. He was sitting on the old wooden swing that my husband had built decades ago, his long legs dangling over the edge, the toes of his sneakers brushing against the ground. The sun caught in his hair, glinting gold like it used to when he was little, and for a moment my breath caught in my throat. I crossed the lawn slowly, not wanting to startle him. "You used to love that swing," I said softly, easing myself down onto the bench beside him. The wood groaned under our combined weight. He didn't look at me right away. His hands, still bearing faint bruises from the crash, fidgeted with the frayed rope at his side. "I don't remember," he said finally, his voice rough with disuse. I smiled gently. "That's all right. I remember enough for both of us." We sat there for a while, the creak of the swing blending with the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. The spring air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of lilacs from the flower beds. Finally he spoke again. "Why them?" he asked. Not with anger, just pure aching confusion. I didn't have an answer. I don't think anyone ever does. "I don't know, baby," I whispered, reaching out to lay a hand on his knee. "Sometimes bad things happen and we never understand why. But you're still here. And I'm still here. And we'll figure this out. Together." He nodded stiffly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. That night, when I checked on him before bed, I found the door to his room slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently and saw him curled up under the blankets, his face buried in the pillow. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Without thinking, I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing slow, soothing circles on his back the way I used to when he was a boy. He didn't pull away. In that moment I realized. He might have turned 18, but grief had stripped him down to the vulnerable child he had once been. And I, for all my wrinkles and aching bones, would be strong enough for both of us. I would be his safe place, no matter how broken the world outside might be. The days lengthened into weeks, and with each sunrise, a subtle shift began to weave itself into the fabric of our lives. It wasn't sudden, not some grand, sweeping change, but small, almost imperceptible steps. At first, I busied myself with little tasks, trying to coax him out of the dark shell he had folded himself into. I remembered how, as a boy, Thomas had loved to help his mother bake, his chubby hands clumsily kneading dough or dusting himself with flour like a mischievous little ghost. I started there. One afternoon I stood in the kitchen, rolling out dough for an apple pie, the kind he used to devour in a single sitting when he was 7. The aroma of cinnamon and sugar filled the air, warm and inviting. I made just a little more noise than necessary, banging pots and pans, humming old songs under my breath. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He lingered in the doorway, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans, his shoulders tense as if unsure whether he was welcome. I turned and smiled, pretending I hadn't been holding my breath. "Hey, chef," I said with mock seriousness. "Think you can help me peel these apples without slicing a finger off?" Something flickered across his face, something that wasn't quite a smile, but close enough to make my heart lift. He shrugged and shuffled over, reaching for the peeler. As we worked side by side, I told silly stories. Embarrassing tales about his mother's teenage misadventures, about my own youthful mistakes, about the time I accidentally baked a loaf of bread with salt instead of sugar and nearly poisoned the entire neighborhood potluck. I exaggerated, played the fool, anything to draw even a hint of laughter from him. It worked. He snorted once, an involuntary sound quickly stifled, but it was real. And it was beautiful. After the pie was in the oven, I leaned against the counter and watched him wipe his hands on a towel. "You know," he said slowly, I get what you're doing." I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "What am I doing?" He gave a small, shy smile, the kind that still carried traces of the boy he used to be. "You're trying to make it easier for me. Trying to make me forget, even if just for a while." I swallowed hard, the sudden lump in my throat catching me off guard. "I don't want you to forget," I said gently. "But I want you to remember that there's still good here. Still love. Still a life that's waiting for you." He nodded, his eyes glistening slightly, and then, before I could react, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was a clumsy hug, stiff and uncertain, but it broke something loose inside me nonetheless. I hugged him back fiercely, smoothing a hand through his unruly hair like I had done when he was small. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered into my shoulder. From that moment, something unspoken shifted between us. He started spending more time with me, not out of obligation but because he wanted to. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when he would retreat into silence, when I would catch him staring blankly out the window, lost somewhere I couldn't follow. But more and more often he chose to stay close. I found ways to weave him into my days, giving him small tasks that made him feel needed, purposeful. Fixing the squeaky cabinet door, raking the leaves from the front yard, painting the old fence that had long since peeled to a tired gray. At first, he took to the tasks like a man half asleep, going through the motions. But slowly, I watched the spark return to his movements, the way he took pride in a job well done, the way he started offering to help before I even asked. "Anything else you need, Grandma?" he would say, wiping sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. "Maybe just your company," I'd reply, teasing. And he would smile, a real bright smile that made the years of sorrow seem just a little more bearable. I cooked for him every day, pouring love into every meal the way my own mother had taught me. Roast chicken with garlic and herbs, creamy mashed potatoes, fresh baked biscuits slathered in butter. And of course desserts, apple pie, lemon bars, chocolate chip cookies that disappeared faster than I could bake them. He teased me once, after polishing off half a tray of brownies. "You trying to fatten me up or something?" he said, licking chocolate from his thumb. "Of course," I said, hands on my hips. "How else am I going to keep you from running off and leaving me alone again?" He laughed, a low, rich sound that wrapped around the kitchen and filled it with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, we would sit together on the back porch, him sprawled lazily in the old rocking chair while I knitted or simply sipped my tea. We would talk about anything and everything. About school, his dreams for the future, books he had loved, TV shows he found ridiculous. He even confided in me once, voice low and hesitant, that he didn't know if he had the strength to go back to college. That the idea of facing the world without his parents terrified him. I listened, heartbreaking, but said nothing for a long moment. Finally, I reached over and took his hand in mine. "You don't have to know everything right now," I said softly. "You just have to keep moving. One step. One day." He nodded, and I knew he understood. We were healing, the two of us. Not perfectly, not quickly, but together. And in that togetherness, in that slow, tender rebuilding, I found that life was not only endurable, it was beautiful still. It was a soft, sleepy kind of evening, the kind that slipped into your bones and made the world feel quieter somehow. The rain tapped gently against the windows, and the house, already old and creaky, seemed to sigh with every drop. I had just finished my nightly routine, folding away my knitting, brushing my hair, pulling back the heavy quilt on my bed, when I heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I called, expecting nothing more than a good night wish. But when the door creaked open, I saw Thomas standing there, his face pale, his hands pressed lightly against his stomach. "Grandma," he said, his voice strained. "My stomach. It hurts. A lot." Immediately, I hurried over to him, my heart clenching at the sight of his discomfort. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, brushing the hair from his forehead. His skin was warm, his eyes a little glassy. "Come lie down. Come here." I guided him to the bed, and he moved gingerly, wincing slightly as he stretched out beside me. I pulled the quilt up over him, tucking it around his sides like I used to do when he was small. "Where does it hurt?" I asked softly. He pointed to a spot just below his ribs, and without thinking, I laid my hand there, pressing lightly, feeling the tension curled tight in his muscles. "It's probably just a cramp," I said gently, hoping to soothe him more with my voice than with certainty. "Maybe something you ate didn't agree with you." He nodded, closing his eyes, his brows furrowed in pain. I hesitated only a moment before I began to rub small, slow circles against his stomach. Light at first, barely more than a brush, then a little firmer as I felt his body start to relax under my touch. "Is this okay?" I asked, my hand stilling for a moment. He opened one eye and gave a small, grateful smile. "Feels good," he murmured. "Thank you." So I continued, kneading carefully, rhythmically, the way my own mother had once done for me when I was young and sick and the world felt too big to face. I marveled at how grown he had become, how long his frame stretched across the bed, but how small he seemed now, curled slightly into himself like a child seeking comfort. After a few minutes, I could feel the tension start to melt from his body, his breathing slowing to a deeper, steadier rhythm. His hands, which had been balled tightly against his chest, relaxed and fell loosely onto the quilt. Without really thinking about it, I let my free hand drift upwards, brushing through his hair, smoothing it back from his forehead. He let out a little sigh, a sound so soft, so vulnerable it made my heart twist. "You always did love having your head scratched," I said with a quiet chuckle, remembering the countless nights he had fallen asleep with his head in my lap, a small, warm weight against me. He didn't answer, but the way he shifted closer told me he remembered too. I continued stroking his hair, trailing my fingers gently across his scalp, scratching lightly in slow, comforting motions. His hair was thick and soft, just like his mother's had been when she was a girl. After a while he spoke, his voice thick with sleep. "Grandma," he said, barely more than a whisper. "You're amazing," he murmured. "You're always here. You always know what to do." I smiled, tears pricking unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. "That's what grandmas are for," I said lightly, though my voice trembled a little with the weight of the moment. But he wasn't done. "You're beautiful too," he said softly, his eyes still closed, as if confessing a secret to the darkness. "You have the kindest eyes. And you smell nice. Like cookies and safety." I let out a soft laugh, blinking quickly to clear the blur from my vision. "You sweet talker," I teased, ruffling his hair gently. But inside, his words settled warm and deep, wrapping themselves around the tired places in my heart. We stayed like that for a long while, him stretched out beside me, my hands moving slowly through his hair, the rain singing against the windows like a lullaby. At some point he drifted into sleep, his breathing deep and even. I stayed awake for a little longer, simply watching him, marveling at the strength and softness that coexisted within him. I thought of how much he had lost, how much he still carried, and yet, here he was, still here, still fighting, even if he didn't realize it. And I thought of myself too, how life had stripped so much away, and yet somehow had brought this boy, this young man, back into my arms. Not as a duty, not as an obligation, but as a gift. I pressed a soft kiss to his temple, breathing in the familiar scent of him, shampoo and fabric softener and something else entirely his own. "You're going to be okay, Thomas," I whispered into the stillness. "We both are." And in that moment, in the quiet warmth of my room, I almost believed it.